For thousands of years, it was just a story, a legend from Hindu scriptures about a golden city, founded by a god, only to be swallowed by the sea. But what if that myth was real? Today, we're looking at the incredible point where ancient legend and modern underwater archaeology collide. All right, let's dive right in. So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into the legend of Dwarka itself, this supposed divine fortress. Then we'll see how modern scientists actually search for something like this. After that, we'll put the myth and the evidence side by side. We'll explore what it all tells us about an ancient civilization, and finally, ask the big question, what does all of this really change? All right, so let's set the stage with the story. At the very heart of this tale is Lord Krishna, one of the most revered figures in Hinduism, and he's on a mission to build the ultimate safe haven for his people. We're not talking about just any city. This was envisioned as an absolute masterpiece. I mean, if you read the ancient texts like the Mahabharata, the picture they paint is it's almost beyond belief. It's described as a literal city of gold, a beacon of prosperity and pure architectural genius. Just try to imagine a place that wasn't just wealthy, but was brilliantly designed for both beauty and for defense. The legend itself is actually pretty practical. Krishna supposedly chose the western coast for its natural defenses. It was a peninsula, or maybe a series of islands, that basically formed a natural fortress. The divine architect, Vishwakarma, is said to have designed it with specific zones for homes, markets, and temples. But, like all great legends, this one has a dramatic ending. After Krishna left the earthly realm, the entire magnificent city was supposedly claimed by the Arabian Sea. Just gone. For centuries, that's all it was, a story. But then, modern science and marine archaeology came into the picture, armed with all these new tools to explore a hidden part of our world. And they started asking, hang on, could there be a kernel of truth to this story sitting at the bottom of the ocean? And to really get the potential here, you have to understand the sheer scale we're talking about. Since the end of the last ice age, rising sea levels have flooded an incredible 27 million square kilometers of land. That's land where entire civilizations could have once thrived. It's this vast, unexplored frontier just waiting for archaeologists. So, how in the world do you find a lost city underwater? Well, it's a super meticulous process. First, ships use sonar to create detailed maps of the seafloor. They're looking for anything that doesn't look natural. Geometric shapes, right angles, anomalies that scream man-made. Then, teams of divers physically go down to investigate those targets up close. And finally, any artifacts they find are carefully brought back to the surface for analysis and, crucially, for dating. And this is where things get really fascinating. This is the point where the ancient story and modern science start to line up in some pretty startling ways. It's all about connecting the dots between the myth and the physical evidence. So, the scriptures talked about formidable fortifications. Well, guess what? Right off the coast of modern-day Dwarka in Gujarat, divers found exactly that: massive, submerged stone foundations, walls, and pillars. The stuff they found wasn't just a random pile of rocks. It points to a large, well-defended settlement. It's a perfect match. The legend also described a meticulously planned city. And, amazingly, underwater mapping and the dive teams revealed remnants of what looked like well-laid-out streets and even a complex drainage system. I mean, come on, that suggests a really high degree of urban planning, which is precisely what the myths were talking about. Can you just imagine what it would feel like to see this with your own eyes? One of the accounts from the people on the expedition just captured it perfectly. It's one thing to see the data on a screen, but it's something else entirely to actually be down there in the water and see columns and statues just emerging from the gloom. It's just magical, a link to a world that's been lost for thousands of years. Okay, so here's the real clincher, the million-dollar question, right? When did this underwater city actually exist? Well, radiocarbon dating of the artifacts and the wooden structures they found places the site smack in the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE. And get this, that timeline aligns perfectly with the traditional era when Lord Krishna is believed to have lived. The science and the scripture were pointing to the exact same moment in history. It's just a jaw-dropping coincidence, if that's what it is. So what does finding a city like this actually mean? This is so much more than just a cool discovery. It has the power to fundamentally change how we look at these ancient stories and the people who might have actually lived them. For maybe the first time ever, we have a tangible, physical framework that seems to build a bridge directly between a foundational mythological story and a possible historical reality. It suggests that these ancient tales, which so many people just dismissed as pure fiction, might actually be rooted in a real place, a real society, and real events.
Yeah, the evidence they pulled from the seabed paints this picture of a remarkably advanced society. Building those structures, that required some sophisticated engineering. The city layout points to organized urban planning, and the artifacts they found suggest this was a bustling hub for trade. This wasn't some primitive settlement, not by a long shot. This was a civilization that was, in a lot of ways, way ahead of its time.
Look, the discovery of Dwarka doesn't just add a new chapter to the history books, it forces us to go back and reread some of the old ones, and to start asking much, much bigger questions. And this really matters because having a sophisticated, ancient urban center like this challenges a lot of the older, often colonial-era theories about how civilization developed in India. It points to a much deeper, more indigenous history of advanced urban life than was accepted by mainstream academics for a long time. It shows civilization in India is ancient, complex, and goes back at least 5,000 years. And that just leaves us with this one final, really tantalizing thought. The story of Dwarka shows us that sometimes where we see myth, there might just be a forgotten history waiting for us, right beneath the waves. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If this legendary city of gold turned out to be real, what other stories that we've all dismissed as fantasy are actually just lost chapters of our own history, waiting to be rediscovered?